Enslaved people on the coffee plantations of the Paraíba Valley. 19th century Brazil. Forced slavery on the coffee plantations of the so-called Coffee Valley, especially in the Vale do Paraíba, was one of the most intense and profitable labor systems of the Império do Brasil. Between the 1830s and 1880s, this region became the heart of the global coffee economy, sustained by the forced labor of tens of thousands of Africans and Afro-Brazilians. Below is a comprehensive overview of who these enslaved people were, how they lived, worked, and resisted. 1. Origins and the slave trade until 1850. Many enslaved workers in the valley were Africans brought through the transatlantic slave trade, particularly from Central West Africa, Congo, and Angola regions. Even after the Eusebio de Queiroz Law, 1850, officially banned the Atlantic trade, the internal slave trade expanded. Enslaved individuals from Brazil's declining sugar regions in the northeast were sold to the booming coffee plantations in the southeast. This forced displacement broke apart families and communities, deepening social trauma. 2. Plantation organization. Coffee plantations were large monoculture estates. Their structure typically included the big house, planter's residence; slave quarters, collective housing for the enslaved; drying yards for coffee beans; storehouses, tulhas, chapel, and workshops. There was also hierarchy among the enslaved. Field hands, heavy agricultural labor; domestic servants worked inside the main house. Skilled workers and overseers, specialized roles or supervision. 3. Coffee labor system. Coffee cultivation required continuous and exhausting labor. Planting, digging holes, transporting seedlings, preparing soil. Maintenance, constant weeding, pest control, and cleaning of plantations. Harvest, the most intense period of the year. Coffee cherries were picked manually under strict supervision. Daily productivity was measured, and failure to meet quotas could lead to punishment. Processing, drying beans under the sun in large yards, manually turning them, removing husks, and packing them for export. Workdays began before sunrise and ended after sunset. 4. Life in the slave quarters. Slave quarters were simple collective buildings with poor ventilation and sanitation. Many slept on straw mats or directly on packed earth floors. Food. The basic diet included beans, manioc, flour, corn, occasionally dried meat, or pork fat. Some were allowed small garden plots to grow supplementary food during limited free time. 5. Violence and social control. The system relied on physical and psychological violence, whipping, stocks, the tronco, chains, public punishments. Imperial law defined enslaved people as property, granting owners extensive disciplinary authority. Constant surveillance and overseers enforced strict labor discipline. 6. Culture, family, and resistance. Despite oppression, enslaved communities preserved African cultural traditions, music and dance, culinary practices. Religious expressions, which later influenced Afro-Brazilian religions. Family and community bonds. Resistance took many forms. Individual escapes. Formation of quilombos, maroon communities. Sabotage or intentional slowing of work. Informal negotiations for better treatment. These actions show that enslaved people were not passive victims, but active historical agents. 7. Enslaved women. Women faced dual exploitation in agricultural labor and domestic service. They were also particularly vulnerable to sexual violence. At the same time, they often played central roles in preserving cultural traditions and sustaining family structures within enslaved communities. 8. Crisis and abolition. In the second half of the 19th century, the system began to weaken due to international pressure against slavery, growing abolitionist movements in Brazil, increasing use of European immigrant wage labor. Gradual laws preceded final abolition in 1888. However, Emancipation occurred without land reform or integration policies, leaving formerly enslaved populations economically marginalized. 9. Legacy: the wealth accumulated by the coffee elite financed railroads, banks, urban expansion in Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. Meanwhile, the newly freed black population faced systemic racism, exclusion, and limited economic opportunities, inequalities that continue to shape Brazilian society. Conclusion: the enslaved people of the coffee valley plantations were the hidden foundation of Brazil's 19th century economic prosperity. They labored under extreme coercion and endured systemic violence, yet they also built networks of solidarity, culture, and resistance. Understanding their experiences is essential to comprehending not only Brazil's economic past, but also the deep roots of its contemporary social inequalities.